Hello all. I welcome you all to this second lecture of the, or let's say the 24th lecture, but the second module of this machine learning for GSM process. So in the last class, we were talking about the what are the main motivations behind, or what are the different challenges that are in front of us, uh, and what is the present situation, and how different sectors, basically the water, food, and energy are linked with each other, and what is the importance of studying this one, the importance of studying the water resource. So we also discussed what is the basic definition of Earth climate, how different forces are linked with each other, and we ended there. And we in the present in the previous class we'll be talking more about the circulations that are linked with the overall monsoon rainfall variability, or in general, if you want to study any circulation patterns and the various processes associated with this global circulation. So in the last class, we stopped here. We were started discussing the vertical profile of atmosphere. The first thing in this class, we'll see the vertical profile of atmosphere. On left hand side, it shows the vertical temperature profile. So how temperature, if you go up, how temperature is changing with respect to the different altitudes. On right hand side, you can see the vertical pressure distribution. So how pressure is changing with respect to altitude. So so this you might have studied if you have studied in climate classes, but I'm reiterating here. So let's see. So in this figure, left and right figure, it talks about the vertical temperature profile. So, so the atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere is held close to the Earth by the gravitational force, gravitational attraction, and large measure, and it rotates along with the Earth. So if you talk about the total mass of the atmosphere, so about 50% of the total mass of the atmosphere is bound is around like say within the 5 kilometers. So within 5 kilometers there is 50% of the atmosphere, and if you go to this depth around 10 kilometers, uh, approximately 20 kilometers, so 80% of the Earth's mass is lying below this atmosphere. So Earth's atmosphere is more concentrated towards the lower depth because of the most of the climate and weather related activities that are happening here. All evaporated water, water vapor, precipitable water, mostly concentrated over this region. So ideally, so if you want to divide the atmosphere into different parts, so there are, let's say, there are 4 parts. So upper, or let's say, if you start from the lowermost part, the lowermost part is called the troposphere, which is approximately at the height of uh, up to, let's say, maximum around 16 kilometers, 16 kilometers over the tropics, uh, or 8 to 16 kilometers, 8 kilometers over the polar regions, and 16 kilometers over the tropics. Then on the top of it, we have the stratosphere, then we have mesosphere and thermosphere. The interesting thing about the troposphere is around like most of the weather and climate related activity that is happening here. So this layer is actually is more important for us when we talk about the weather phenomena that is happening here. So if you see, if you go to a different height, the pressure decreases from 1000 to, let's say, this around 300 or 200 MB. The temperature decreases as we go up into the atmosphere. So, so as I said, the height of this tropopause varies. It varies with the latitude and also with the season. So around 8 to 10 kilometers in the polar latitude, 10 to 12 kilometers in the mid latitude region, and 16 kilometers over the tropics. So we'll come to this why this height varies over different parts of the Earth. It is basically because of the how much amount of energy is being received by the sun over different latitudes. So tropics receive more energy, so there is more expansion, whereas polar regions receive less energy, so there is more cooling or more subsidence that is taking place over that region. That's why the height of this troposphere is less for this region. Next to that, we have another layer that is known as the stratosphere. The stratosphere, the lower part of the stratosphere is actually the isothermal environment. So temperature does not vary much, does not vary with the height. So ideally, it remains the temperature is usually constant. So this is So this is the lower part of it. So another interesting thing that we should know is the layer that separates the stratosphere with the troposphere, and that layer is known as the tropopause. So yeah, so when I was talking about the height of the troposphere, I was talking about the height of this tropopause. So tropopause is a layer at which sudden changes take place. So the the interaction between these two layers are not very, or you can say, very easy. So whatever, so we hardly see any, or the exchange between these two layers is not very obvious. So it's kind of top lit to the atmosphere, lower atmosphere to the troposphere. So we call it as a tropopause. Okay. So yeah. So what are the properties of this troposphere? Troposphere, the properties are there is a more like or less uniform decrease in the temperature with the height. Uh, uh, as we move up, there is a decrease in temperature. We call it as a lapse rate. So around 6.5 degrees Celsius uh, lapse rate per kilometer. That is a environmental lapse rate. We also see the increasing wind speed with the increasing height in the troposphere. This is the principal medium. So this troposphere is the principal medium for movement of mass, energy, and momentum over the Earth's surface. And practically all the weather phenomena, uh, such as cloud formation, precipitation, thunderstorm, all these weather phenomena takes place within the boundary of troposphere. Next layer is stratosphere. The height of the stratosphere is around 50 kilometers. The lower stratosphere has a remarkably stable, as I said, mostly isothermal environment. Uh, so mostly the weather phenomena is normally absent uh, above the tropopause. So this is mostly stable, hydrostatically stable and poorly mixed atmosphere. So whatever disturbance that is taking place troposphere, that can be immediately reflected here, but stratosphere is actually more poorly mixed layer and more stable. So it does not take place into much of the weather activity. Another interesting thing about stratosphere is around like the presence of ozone. It it has around 97% of the ozone of the Earth in this stratosphere. So in the last class, we have seen how this ozone formation of ozone takes place. So Earth receives, so this atmosphere receives ultraviolet radiation from the sun, and the molecule of oxygen gets converted and disintegrated into the uh, oxygen, the oxygen molecule, and it combines with the molecule of oxygen in the presence of UV ray, and the ozone gets formed. So it's kind of layer, that buffer layer that protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiation that are coming from the sun. Next, so in this layer, so for the bottom layer is most isothermal, but after some time, the temperature after some altitude, the temperature increases, and the upper boundary of the stratosphere is known as stratopause. From the stratopause to approximately 80 kilometer height, we have the mesosphere, where again there is a decrease in temperature. So then we have the mesopause. So mesopause is actually the coldest layer of starting from around 85 kilometers to the topmost atmosphere. So this is called as the mesopause, and just above the mesopause is the coldest layer of the atmosphere, which is around let's say less than minus 80 degrees Celsius temperature. This is the coldest layer of the atmosphere, and above that again the temperature increases, and there is, it receives it absorbs very high shortwave radiation, very high intensity or high energy shortwave radiation. That's why there is significant heating takes place. This temperature of this layer is increasing. That's why it's called as a thermosphere. So these are the different layers, vertical temperature profile. Our concentration will be more, will be focusing more on the troposphere, because most of the weather phenomena takes place in this. Uh, Most of the weather phenomena takes place here in the troposphere. Okay. let's have a little more discussion on the tropopause. So tropopause, as I said, so let's say this is equator. So height of the tropopause is different over different part of the uh, globe, depending on what latitude we have. In the North Pole, the height of the tropopause, so this red color denotes the tropopause is less. Here, equator, since there is a more warming, more sunlight received, more evaporation takes place. So there is kind of cloud formation, and there is an expansion of the atmosphere here. So height of the tropopause is more over the equator. So tropopause, as I said, is the upper boundary of the troposphere, and it separates the troposphere from the stratosphere. So beyond this layer, temperature cease to decrease with the height at the boundary of troposphere. So troposphere, so as I said, so the height is different for different layer, and that has something to do with the heating that is received by the Earth, Earth surface. So you can see, okay, so there are some breaks here. So these breaks, will see why these breaks are there. Okay, so in between this so tropopause height is different along different latitude, and along uh, some latitude there is a sharp decrease in the height, and we call it as a tropopause break. Uh, First break is observed around 40-degree latitude, where the warm uh, uh, circulating air from the equator that is coming meets the colder air from the latitude. So there is one drop, there is one break. Another break is around 60 to 70 degree, and another break is around 55 to around 55 degree latitude. So this 60 to 70 degree latitude break is takes place where the polar air meets uh, the Arctic air. Uh, and these kind of breaks these are actually more common in the northern hemisphere. So what happens because of this break? So presence of break create some kind of void, or they make favorable condition for very high transport of wind from one across the latitude, and we call it as a jet. So this presence of this break can cause strong winds that move from one across in the zonal direction, and we call it as a jet stream. So this is subtropical jet that is taking place, that is blowing around 30-degree north, and there is the polar jet that is happening, that is blowing in the polar region. Coming to the another important topic, free cell model or planetary wind. So in the Earth's surface, so depending on the heating of the Earth's surface, we have different cell formation. So uh, so ideally, so we have, so let's say this is your Earth surface, which is rotating in from west to this direction. More heating is taking place over the equator compared to the polar. So the polar or equator region receives more amount of warming. So what is happening? So if the Earth gets warmer here, uh, there is more like there is a rising motion that takes place. So rising that takes place in the rising warm air, and that results in the cloud formation, and that's why most of the tropical regions receive more amount of rainfall. Now this rising air motion that takes place over the equator, it starts, so there is a more warming here, so there is a more or you can say the lower pressure formation here. There is a less heating received here, so there is a more uh, high pressure formation here. So wind will try to move from high pressure to low pressure in this direction, and in the upper atmosphere, this cycle will take place towards the north in the northward direction. So so the air that has been risen here will try to move towards the polar region, but because of some uh, some other factors that we'll discuss in the later part of this module, let's call it the Coriolis. That is because of the Coriolis and the movement of Earth. Instead of going north, it has to descend somewhere around 30-degree latitude in the both side of the equator. So 30-degree north and 30-degree south. Okay, so this first cell, and once it is descent, it again uh, starts traveling towards the equator. So this is one cell that is formed here, that is called as the Hadley cell. So the descending air at the subtropics, upon reaching this lower troposphere, is forced to diverge because, let's say, here we have the tropopause, so winds cannot cross this tropopause, so it is traveling in this direction. So descending air at the subtropics upon reaching the lower troposphere is forced to diverge in the presence of Earth's surface. Some air moves forward, so descending air, some air moves forward, and some air moves in the equatorward. So in either direction, the air is deflected to the right because, as I said, because of the Coriolis forces. So it is deflected in the like deflected to the right hand side in the northern hemisphere, and it's deflected on the deflected to the left hand side in the uh, southern hemisphere. So that we'll see when we discuss about the uh, Coriolis forces and rotation of the Earth. So this is the first cell that forms here, Hadley cell. Now, if you can see, this layer, this region is receiving more amount of radiation, so this is a low pressure region. And since the air is sinking here, it is high pressure region. So if you see, so this is the subtropical region where Hadley cell is sinking, or where the rising air is sinking. Okay, so since the air is sinking here, it becomes our high pressure region, or the high pressure region, or these are the more drier regions where most of the desert of the earth are actually there. Okay, so between high pressure and low pressure region, winds start to move in this direction from high to low pressure, and because of the rotation of the earth, they get deflected in different directions. So if you are in northern hemisphere, they get deflected toward the right, uh, and we call it as a trade wind. Similarly, in the southern hemisphere, there is a subsidence that is taking place here over subtropical south latitude. So there is high pressure formation here, low pressure is already there. So winds will try to move from high pressure to low pressure. And the southern hemisphere, they instead of going directly towards the north, they'll get deflected in the left hand side direction, or towards the left, or towards the east, you can call it as, uh, or towards the west. Since they are originated from the east southeast direction, we call it southeast trade wind. So both of these winds are the trade winds that are actually uh, moving along the surface in the lower atmosphere. This is called as a trade wind. So this is a northeast trade wind, so northeasterly, or you can call it a tropical easterly. These are the trade winds. So in the north latitude, in the northern hemisphere, we call it as a northeast trade wind. Here in the southern hemisphere, we call them as a southeast trade wind. Okay, so this is the first cycle, Hadley cycle. There is another cycle that is formed over the polar region. So remember, as I said, polar region, there is a high, so since there is a less warming, so there is a comparatively high pressure formation over the polar region than over the equatorial region. So winds will try to compensate this pressure difference. Winds will try to move in this direction. Uh, so compared to polar regions, this region is comparatively warmer. So there is a warming. So the warming air rises up and subsides here. So this is another cell that is formed here, and that is known as the polar cell. Okay. Now in the polar cell, since as I said, so winds will try to move from high pressure to low pressure region. So because of the rotation of Earth, they'll get deflected towards the uh, they get deflected to the right in the northern hemisphere. So they are deflected here. So these are called as the polar easterly. Same process happening in the southern hemisphere also. We call it as a polar easterly. So now we have the Hadley cell and the polar cell. So these two cells. So these two cells are the thermal cells. Those are actually governed by the temperature difference, or thermal circulation. In between these two, there is a mechanical cell that has been started because of these two cells. So this is known as a ferrule cell. So since there is a warming here, rising air is moving here. Some part of it gets deflected here. Some part of it traveled here. Some part of this subsiding air will join to this, since this is a comparatively higher pressure region than this one region, so winds will, so there is subsidence takes place, but there is comparatively higher pressure, so wind will try to move from high pressure to low pressure region. So this cell will get complete. So this is the ferrous cell. This is a three-cell model, and winds that are the surface wind that are blowing in this ferrous cell is actually the southwesterly. So since they are moving from the south towards the north, since they are moving from the southwest direction, they call it southwesterly. In the southern hemisphere, they call it the northwesterly. So these are the three. This is a three-cell model, which is actually a combination of polar cell, ferrous cell, and Hadley cell. Okay. Now this, because of these three cells, we have three prevailing wind belts that are actually uh, they are present in the each of this atmosphere, and these are called as the, and because of these three cells, there are three kinds of planetary wind circulation that are taking place in each of the hemisphere. So there's a tropical easterlies, that is so tropical easterlies that are taking place or that are going uh, in the Hadley cell between 0 to 30 degree north or 0 to 30 degree south. This belt mostly was a tropical belt, so that's why we call it the uh, tropical easterly. So since they are moving from southeast direction, so we call it the southeast easterly here, trade wind. Since they are moving from the northeast direction, we call it the northeasterly trade wind. So basically, these are the trade winds. So this is the first kind of planetary wind. This is a tropical easterly. Second is actually prevailing westerly. So these are the prevailing westerlies that are happening in the uh, towards the north side of subtropic over the mid-latitude region. So these are prevailing westerlies that are moving from the west to the north. So these are the southwesterly and this is northwesterly. So these are prevailing westerlies uh, uh, that are present in the uh, mid-latitude region. So between 30 degree north to 60 degree north. Next is actually next planetary winds are actually the polar easterlies, so that are moving from pole towards the mid-latitude region. So these are the polar easterlies in the northern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. So these are the three. These are the prevailing winds that affect the overall circulation on the planet Earth. We'll be coming to this. Why I'm mentioning here, because we'll be discussing these things again and again as we move, as we proceed in this module. Okay. Another way to look at this is, so since we are looking, so if you take a cross section and you see the circulation, so this cell will look like this. So over the pole, the height of this tropopause is less, as I said, already discussed. Over the mid latitudes, comparatively higher than the polar, height of this tropopause is comparatively higher, but highest level of highest height of tropopause is over the tropical region. That is because of the more warming that is taking. Since there is more warming taking place, there is a strong lower pressure formation here, and since the air is the height of tropopause is less, and there is a less amount of warming here, there is a less expansion, so there is a strong high pressure formation here. And in between, we have the high pressure over this subtropical uh, ridge, subtropical horse latitude. Okay. Another thing is why it's called horse latitude, because there is strong subsidence takes place. So these are the regions of the earth where is very less productivity. Okay. And these are the regions where most of the productivity takes place. Productivity in terms of like plants, if you can say, if you are in the land surface, there is more productivity, whereas in the ocean, there is a more amount of phytoplankton over this region compared to the this region, subsiding region. Yeah. So coming back to this thing again, so we have strong low pressure formation here, strong high pressure formation here, and these are the three cells. So this is the northern hemisphere. The same is happening in the southern hemisphere as well. So this first cell is called as Hadley cell, where strong northeast trade winds are moving in the lower layer. This is actually your polar cell where strong easterly blowing in the surface in the lower level. In between them, we have the feral cell where warm southwesterly blows. So this is a region where, see, this region, equator region, normally it receives more amount of solar radiation. So that's why this is a high temperature region. So this is so since there is a low pressure formation here, so air from both sides of the equator will uh, try to uh, try to move in this direction or try to compensate this low pressure formation. So that's why there is a strong convergence over the equator region. So that's why it is called as the intertropical convergence zone. So this intertropical convergence zone is not fixed, but it changes its position uh, as season, like with different seasons. So during summer season, it is moved towards the northern hemisphere, whereas during the winter, it is moved towards the southern hemisphere. Okay, so this ITCZ, that is the intertropical convergence zone, correspond to the equatorial trough, and it is a mechanism that helps generate deep uh, uh, equivalent in the clouds through the convection. So a lot of convecting activity is taking place here. So this kind of convection that is taking place, that is actually a strong way of transporting the heat that is generated here and distributing it to the different parts of the hemisphere. So yeah, so more energy we receive. So this energy in the atmosphere is distributed to the higher latitude by this circulation on both sides of this hemisphere, both sides of this equator in the both of this hemisphere, northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. There is another important thing that we should know that is actually more important when we discuss the Indian monsoon. That is the Coriolis force. So let's assume, since we have this is a non-rotating Earth, let's assume the Earth is not rotating. So we know that our equator receive more amount of heating compared to the polar. That's why there is a strong low formation here. So ideally, if Earth is not rotating, so there is a high pressure formation here, low pressure formation here. So wind should uh, uh, wind should in the lower atmosphere, wind should move directly from high pressure to lower pressure region, from pole to the east, pole to the equator, and in upper atmosphere, the cell should look like this. So, and same thing should look like this in the southern hemisphere. But since the Earth is rotating, this is not vertical, it's not exactly directly moving like this. So since Earth is moving in this direction from west to east, so as it moves from away from the equator, it gets deflected towards the right. In the northern hemisphere, it gets deflected here uh, in this direction in the southern hemisphere. This is also right, but we are looking at it from the equator. If you see, this is also right, but uh, some people call it deflected towards left. So ideally, they are deflected uh, away from the deflection is more as we move away from the equator, and this is known as the Coriolis force. Coriolis force. Okay. So over the equator, the value of Coriolis force is very small, but if you move towards the mid latitude regions, the value or towards even the polar regions, the Coriolis force is even stronger because there is a lesser amount of zonal length of the zonal latitude or latitudes are smaller than here. So Earth is kind of the length is contracted here, and also because of the motion, it is being uh, deflected towards the right. Okay, so this is a general diagram that shows the deflection caused by the Coriolis forces. So no deflection at the equator, maximum deflection at the pole, maximum deflection at the poles, so northern pole and southern pole. Uh, if any particle that is moving from this point, because this is comparatively higher pressure than this one, so high pressure to low pressure, the wind takes place. So it will get deflected in the right direction here, and above this subtropical ridge, it will deflect it in this direction. So this is a how Coriolis force acts and how it is helpful in transporting its information of circulation. So that we'll discuss more detail when we discuss on the ocean currents and how the winds are being deflected. So another important thing, if you can see over this region the deflection is more high, so winds will become more deflected over the as over the region that are more distant from the equator. So this figure shows the same thing. This is non-rotating Earth, so directly particle is coming here from high pressure to low pressure. But in case of rotating Earth, it gets deflected in this direction. Okay, so yeah, so in the when we're discussing about the different cells, we were discussing about the prevailing wind or planetary wind. We have discussed the trade wind. So in the northern hemisphere, the warmer air around the equator rises. So the warmer air around the equator rises and flows north toward the pole. So it tends to flow towards the northern pole. As air moves away from the equator, so here, as we said, the Coriolis force is very small, but as we move away from the equator, the Coriolis force is becoming more stronger, and instead of and this northward movement will become weak, and it will tend to subside over this region around 30 degrees north. So it pulls and descends over 30 degrees north, and again the descending limb will again try to join the lower pressure region over the equator. So this descent from starting from this descending limb to the the lower pressure at the surface level at the equator region is called as a trade wind. Similar patterns observed over the southern hemisphere. So this wind blows from the southeast towards the northwest. This wind moves from the southeast towards the northwest. Sorry, towards the northwest and descends near the 30 degrees south. Okay. So these are the trade winds, and these trade winds meet at the intertropical convergence zone. That is around like ideal location to more different locations within ideal. But the location also changes with respect to the season. So these are the this figure shows the direction of the trade winds. Okay, so you can see this is deflected towards the right. So this is like southeasterly winds. This is northeasterly trade winds. These are more westerly winds, southwest like northwesterly winds. These are yeah. So likewise, so these are westerly. Again, these are westerly. Again, here they are easterly, and here again they are westerly. So these are the global trade winds, and they are actually very important. Uh, they play a very important role in transporting the heat from equator. Uh, they're important in transporting heat from one place to another place. Sorry, not heat. They are very important in circulating the or distributing the heat from one part of the earth to another part of the earth. Okay, so why it is called trade winds? So trade winds are being known from very like older times, starting from the 17th century. So the traders, which they or sailors, you can call it. Earlier time, the transport or trading used to take place by the help of ships. So sailors used to make advantage of this trade winds while exploring the or while traveling from one point to another. So that's why they called it a trade wind. So another important, so right now we were discussing about the trade winds, the surface, uh, like above the ocean surface. So now coming to the ocean surface current, uh, uh, this in this slide we'll be talking about the ocean surface current. So as I said, so because of the differential heating of the Earth's surface at different latitudes result into the certain atmospheric circulation cell. This cell define the main latitudinal wind belt, and because of the Coriolis forces, there will be different trade winds. So this is the northwesterly trade winds because of the deflection in the northern latitude. Similarly, here we have southwesterly prevailing westerlies and polar easterlies. So these winds driven by the atmospheric circulation and are deflected by the earth spin, uh, and this is known as the correlative effect. So okay, now this is what the how the air current takes place. What happens to the ocean current at the surface? So let's for a minute, let's assume for a moment, let's assume that we don't have any land mass. So in the absence of land mass, there will be strong uh, flows that will take place uh, by this because of the storm which is driven by the storm surface flow. So by considering this Ekman transport and this one, uh, so ocean surface currents are driven by the wind on a planet. So this is a planet which is without landmass. The latitudinal wind base would result in corresponding belt of surface current. Okay. So ideally, if there is no land, so the circulation or wind or the ocean surface current should take place like this. So more westward circulation along the mid latitude, more uh, sorry, most westward circulation along the equator, just above the equator, most eastward circulation just above the mid latitude, and very weak westward flowing current over the polar region. But because of the presence of different land masses, so this surface current gets disturbed. So this is the ideal way, or the presence of various continents and the land masses. This is how the surface current will look like. So in the presence of continents, this current will deflect by the presence of land. So in the next class, so we'll stop here. In the next class, we'll be discussing more about the ocean surface current and how they transport the heating that has been received at the equator to the different parts of the uh, different high latitude, and how the current from the high latitude is affecting uh, the circulation, or how the high latitude current is coming back to the different parts of the globe. So with that, we'll stop here. Thank you.